Just picture this for a moment. Someone comes up to you and offers you a job that is super easy to do, and on top of that, they promise to pay you a massive amount of money for it. Would you say yes to that? I think almost everyone would agree to do it without even thinking twice. That is exactly how our very first story begins today. When we look back at what happened, there were so many obvious warning signs that something was wrong, but the person in the story completely ignored them. This particular day started out as a very calm and normal day for the person telling the story, who was just playing Minecraft, but things quickly took a very dark and scary turn. You are going to see exactly how it all went wrong very soon. So, let us jump right into the first story, which was sent in by a member of our community, a user named NoCardiologist1353. The main idea of the story is this. My university offered me $2,000 just to stay completely quiet for one single night. My university was running some very strange and weird overnight experiments. I first found out about these weird experiments during my second semester of college, right around the time when my bank account dropped down to less than $40. I saw a flyer pinned up on a bulletin board right outside the psychology department building. The flyer was advertising something called an overnight silent study. The money they were offering was listed as $2,000 for just one single night of staying there. The rules for the study were very strict. You had to stay awake the whole time, you had to remain completely silent without making a single sound, and you had to follow every single instruction given by the research staff. If anyone was interested in doing this, the flyer said to go to room SA-213, which was located on the second floor of the psychology building, where they kept all the testing rooms. I must have read that flyer at least 10 times because it was so crazy. $2,000 for just one night was an unbelievable amount of money, and it was way more than I made in a whole month working my part-time job at the campus bookstore. But then I saw a note written by hand at the very bottom of the flyer, and it sent a cold shiver down my spine. The note said, "Participants who leave early will not be compensated." For some strange reason that I still cannot explain, that specific sentence bothered me more than anything else on the page. It was not because I was planning to leave early, but because the fact that they even had to write it down meant that leaving early was a very real possibility for the people doing the test. In the end, my empty bank account is what finally made up my mind for me. Holding the flyer tightly in my hand, I walked into the building and took the stairs up to the second floor. Right behind the door marked SA-213, there was a small waiting area with just a few chairs sitting in it. At the very end of the room, there was a hallway guarded by a small desk. Sitting behind that desk was a young woman who looked like she was only a little bit older than I was. When I walked up to the desk, she looked up at me and gave me a very nice, friendly smile. "Hello," she said in a warm and welcoming voice. "Can I help you with something today?" Yes," I answered, walking closer to her desk. "I was just wondering if there is still a chance for me to sign up for this study." I slid the piece of paper across the desk toward her. As her eyes read over the words on the paper, her smile faded away for just a quick second, and she quickly looked up at my face before looking back down at the flyer, and then her smile got even bigger than before. "The silent study. Yes, we still have some open spots left. Would you like to register for it?" A huge wave of excitement rushed through my whole body. Yes, I would absolutely love to. $2,000 is way too much money to say no to. She let out a laugh that sounded a little bit forced and nervous, and then she asked for my personal information. She carefully wrote down my full name, my phone number, the contact info for my emergency person, and my basic medical history. After she finished collecting all the information she needed from me, she said, "All right, I think I have everything I need from you now. You will need to be at the Garner Building by 9 o'clock at night this coming Tuesday. The study is going to take place in the empty dorm rooms on the very top floor. You are allowed to bring any books or school homework you want to keep yourself busy, but please do not bring anything that plays music or movies, because those things are strictly not allowed during a silent study." I nodded my head really fast to show I understood. Garner Building, 9 p.m. on Tuesday. I got it. As I turned around to walk away, she called out to me, "Oh, wait, one more thing. I almost forgot to give you this." I turned back around to face her. She pushed a thick packet of papers across the desk toward me. "Please read over these and sign the consent forms." The The packet of papers was almost an inch thick. I only skimmed through most of the pages and just signed my name on the very last page. As I was walking out of the room, I heard the secretary's voice calling out behind me, "Good luck to you." Tuesday came around really fast. I spent the whole day just resting and getting my backpack ready, filling it up with snacks and books to read for the long night ahead. By 8:50 in the evening, I was standing right in front of the Garner Building. A few moments later, a balding man in his 40s walked out and asked me, "Are you the one here for the study?" I swallowed hard because I was nervous and nodded my head. "Yes, sir." "Excellent. Please come with me." He walked with me inside the building and led me straight to the elevator. He pressed the button for the 5th floor, and we rode it all the way up to the very top. When the elevator doors slid open, we stepped out into a hallway that was lit very dimly by sickly-looking yellow fluorescent lights. The hallway looked almost exactly like all the other dorm hallways on our campus, but it had a very creepy and quiet feeling to it, as if nobody had walked on this floor for many years. The man walked with me further down the long hall and finally stopped in front of room 504. "This is the room where you will be staying for the night," he told me. "Just so you know, we have put security cameras in every single area of the room except for the bathroom, just to make sure you stay completely quiet the whole night. We have also put in an intercom system so we can talk to you." I looked at him with a very confused face. "What is the intercom for?" He answered me by saying, "At the start of every single hour, we will use it to announce the time. If everything goes exactly as we plan, this will be the only human voice you hear the entire night." His explanation did not make me feel any better or safer, but the thought of getting $2,000 had a magical way of making all my worries seem very small. I grabbed the doorknob, turned it, and stepped inside the room. The man added one last thing. "Remember, you are totally free to leave the room at any time you want. But please keep in mind that anyone who leaves before the night is over will not get any money at all." With those final words, he reached out and pulled the door shut behind me. I heard the soft clicking sound of the lock turning, and I realized that the study had officially started. I turned around to look at the room I was in, and I saw that it was not very different from my own regular dorm room. It was lit softly by just one main light on the ceiling and a small reading lamp sitting on a desk in the corner. The floor had soft carpet on it, and a bed that was built up high took up one whole wall. Right underneath the lofted bed, there was a very comfy reading chair and a small mini-fridge. On the wall opposite the bed, there was a large wardrobe closet with a funny poster on it. The poster had a picture of a cat hanging from a tree branch, and it had the encouraging words, "Hang in there," written on it. The outside wall of the room had a big window that looked out over the campus courtyard. Unlike my own dorm room, this one had a short little hallway that branched off to the right side of the entrance door. This small hallway had a tiny kitchen area with a few cupboards and a sink, along with a very small closet for coats. At the very end of that little hall, there was another door that led into a small bathroom with a toilet, a sink, and a really tight, cramped shower. Without even thinking, I opened my mouth to say something about how the room looked, but then I suddenly remembered that I was not supposed to speak again until the morning came. I put my backpack down on the floor, pulled out a book, and sat down comfortably in the reading chair. The very first hour passed by without anything weird happening at all. I just sat there in the chair, totally focused on reading my book. Exactly an hour later, a loud, boring, and monotone voice suddenly broke the complete silence. "It is now 10 p.m. I let out a long breath of air that I did not even realize I was holding inside my lungs. I scolded myself in my head for forgetting about the intercom system so quickly, and then I went back to looking at my book. At 10:30, I needed a quick break from reading because the words on the page were starting to hurt my eyes. I stood up from my chair, stretched my arms and legs, and started to lazily look around the dorm room to pass the time. I opened all the cupboard doors in the tiny kitchen area and only found a few basic cups and bowls inside. I looked out the window, watching the other students walking around outside. After that, I walked into the bathroom and opened the closet door, which was completely empty except for just one single winter coat hanging inside. Finally, I went over to the large wardrobe and opened its doors, and as I did that, a crumpled up piece of paper fluttered down and landed on the floor. Seeing that it had writing on it, I bent down and picked it up. The note said, "If you found this, read it before midnight. The researchers will not tell you all the details. Remain completely silent, not just quiet. The researchers are studying what happens to people during long periods of silence. Do not ruin the observation. If another person doing the study enters your room, do not talk to them or acknowledge them. Each person is supposed to be in a single room by themselves. If the intercom asks you a question, the study is over. Leave the room right away. Time announcements should only happen on the exact hour. If the intercom talks at any other time, cover your ears and ignore what it says. Do not look into the hallway between 1:13 a.m. and 1:20 a.m. If you hear 3 knocks, ignore them. However, if you hear 4 knocks, move away from the door right away. If you hear crying from the bathroom, do not go check on it. If the lights go out, close your eyes and count to 100. If you see someone in the courtyard staring at your window, close the blinds and do not open them again for 2.5 hours. At some point during the night, you will hear your own voice. It will ask you a question. Do not answer it. If the intercom announces, "It is now 3:07 a.m., hide yourself inside the coat closet until another announcement is made. No matter what happens, do not open the wardrobe a second time." I could not stop myself from rolling my eyes at the note. It was completely obvious to me that a previous person who did the study, probably because they were bored out of their mind, had made up a creepy prank to scare the next person staying in the room. I crushed the paper into a ball and threw it away in the trash can. After I filled my water glass back up and grabbed a quick snack from my bag, I went back to my chair and opened my book again. I looked up from my reading at exactly 11 p.m. when the intercom speaker crackled and announced, "It is now 11 p.m. I slowly looked all around the room to check for anything weird. After 2 whole hours of complete silence, I felt like the room itself had become much louder than before. Every single little creak and groan of the old building seemed to be amplified and super loud. After checking out the room a few more times, I went back to focusing on my book. Around 11:40, I started to feel really sleepy and tired, so I stood up and did some jumping jacks and ran in place for a little while just to get my blood flowing and wake myself up. I was still inside the bathroom when the clock hit midnight. The intercom voice declared loudly, "It is now 12 a.m. I finished up my business in the bathroom and walked back to my chair to read my book. I almost jumped out of my skin in pure terror 20 minutes later, at exactly 12:20 a.m., when the intercom suddenly stated, "Participant 3 is now reading a book." I slowly lowered my book and quickly looked all around the room. That was a very weird thing to hear. I had assumed the intercom was only going to be used for telling the time. Was I participant number 3? I sat there completely frozen for several minutes, waiting to hear if it would say anything else. I noticed a low humming noise that had not been there before. However, after waiting for 10 long minutes and hearing nothing else, I stood up and reached into my bag to get a snack. As I was doing that, the intercom announced again, "Participant 3 is eating." I froze completely still with the food halfway to my mouth and looked up at the small security camera in the corner of the ceiling, which seemed to be staring right directly at me. Why would they announce what I was doing in such a creepy way? The humming noise got much louder as I walked back and sat down in my chair. At exactly 12:39, the intercom spoke a third time. "Participant 3 is breaking the rules." I looked around the room in total confusion. What rule could I have possibly broken? I had not said a single word out loud. The humming sound was now so incredibly loud that it was actually causing physical pain in my ears. 5 minutes later, at exactly 12:44, the intercom announced in that same flat voice, "Participant 3 is going to die." Pure panic grabbed hold of me as the humming reached a painfully high volume, making it feel like my brain was about to literally explode from the pressure. But right at that exact moment, I suddenly remembered the note I had thrown in the trash and rule number 2. I slapped both of my hands tightly over my ears as hard as I could. Even with my hands covering them, I could still feel the heavy vibrations shaking through my palms. However, after a few short moments, the terrible noise just stopped completely. I carefully took my hands away from my ears, and everything was completely silent once again. The humming sound had vanished into thin air, as if it had never even existed in the first place. Cold sweat was dripping down my forehead as I walked over to the trash can and pulled out the crumpled up piece of paper to smooth it out. I studied the creepy rules for several long minutes, but then I suddenly heard the jingling of metal keys and the sound of someone clumsily fumbling with the lock before I turned around and saw the front door slowly swing open. Standing there in the doorway was a guy who looked to be exactly my age. He had messy blonde hair, was wearing shorts and sandals, and had a sweatshirt on with the university's logo on it. A bag was sitting on the floor next to his feet. He looked right at me and gave me a big smile. "Hey man," he said casually. "Guess we're going to be roommates for the night. What's your name?" "I'm Chris." I was way too shocked and confused to say anything back, but he just kept talking. "What's your major?" "Mine's business." "Are you as pumped as I am to be here?" I was just about to reply to him, but the rules I was holding in my hand caught my eye. Rule number 2 clearly said, if another participant enters your room, do not acknowledge them. Participants are assigned one room each. A freezing cold chill ran all the way down my spine as I read those words again. "What you got there?" the man asked, noticing the piece of paper in my hand. I dropped my eyes to look at the floor and stayed completely silent. He stopped talking and walked much closer to me. He was standing just mere inches away from my face. "Is that orientation information?" he asked, pointing his finger at the paper. "Why don't you give that to me?" he asked in a very smooth, slippery voice. Without even thinking, I pulled my hand away from him, but as I did that, he suddenly shouted loudly, "Give it to me!" My hand was shaking violently as I folded the paper up and shoved it deep into my pocket. He grunted in annoyance and said, "Look at me." His voice had completely changed, getting much deeper and cracking in a weird way. "Look at me." I swallowed hard, squeezing my eyes shut tight. I could feel his hot breath blowing on my face, and it smelled like a really foul, terrible odor. I just stood there with my eyes closed for what felt like an absolute eternity. But when I finally opened my eyes again, he was completely gone. The door was shut tight and locked from the outside. It was exactly 12:57 a.m. I was an absolute nervous wreck. The rules I had in my pocket had to be completely real. I wanted to just leave right then, to escape from that terrible place and never come back. But after the crazy things I had just experienced, I seriously doubted that I could actually just walk out. It seemed much safer to just obey the weird rules and try to survive the night. After taking a few minutes to calm my racing heart down, I pulled the rules out of my pocket and read them again. Rule number 5 said, do not look into the hallway between 1:13 a.m. and 1:20 a.m. I looked at the clock and saw it was 1:05 a.m. I glanced over toward the small hallway that led to the bathroom, wondering what on earth could possibly happen in there in just 8 short minutes. Whatever it was going to be, I definitely was not going to look at it. My reading chair was facing the main door, which meant I could easily see the hallway from where I was sitting. Because of that, I turned the chair around so it was facing the window instead. As I was turning the chair, I happened to glance out the window. Down there, standing in the dark courtyard, was a very tall, shadowy figure holding a single lit candle, and it was staring directly up at my window. I could not tell exactly how far away it was, only that it definitely had not been there just moments before. Without wasting a single second, I pulled the curtains shut tight and set a timer on my phone for 2.5 hours. As I was doing that, I felt the temperature in the room drop and get noticeably colder. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up when I heard the sounds of dishes clinking and moving around from the hallway. I did not even dare to turn my head around, completely unwilling to risk seeing what was standing out there in the hallway. It sounded exactly like someone was in there preparing to cook a meal. I could clearly hear the distinct sounds of vegetables being chopped up on a cutting board and a pot of water being heated up until it started to boil. Even though the tiny kitchen area I had seen earlier did not have a stove in it, every now and then, I could hear someone trying to whistle a happy tune, but it was in a very flat, unmusical, and creepy manner. Around the 6-minute mark of this noise, I heard a quiet, dry voice muttering to itself, need to get some rosemary. Then, I heard the sound of heavy, slow footsteps walking out of the hallway. They crossed the soft carpet very slowly, taking one step, then another step, and then there was just silence. Complete and total silence. I could no longer tell where the thing was located in the room. I was just about to turn around to check when, right directly by my right ear, I heard a mocking, teasing whisper say, "Still here? Huh." Right after that whisper, I heard footsteps walking away and the loud sound of the heavy door slamming shut. I very slowly turned my head around to look. It was exactly 1:21 a.m. Everything was relatively quiet and normal for a while after that. At exactly 2:30, a very loud, terrible wailing sound suddenly came from inside the bathroom and just kept going for about 20 solid minutes. After the crying finally stopped, I carefully pushed the bathroom door open to peek inside. The room was completely empty. Sometime after 3:20, I was getting incredibly tired and fatigued. The heavy silence was making my eyelids feel super heavy. Just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, all the lights in the room suddenly went completely out. The sudden, pitch-black darkness sent a massive jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins, waking me up instantly. Coming from the dark bathroom, I could hear a sharp clicking sound. It sounded exactly like the noise of a dog with very long, sharp nails walking on a hard hardwood floor, and the sound was getting closer and closer to me. Remembering the rule about the lights going out, I squeezed my eyes shut as tight as I possibly could and started counting numbers in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The clicking sound was now directly right in front of my face. 10, 11, 12, 13. The clicking sound suddenly stopped, and right directly in front of me, I heard the sickening creaking of bones shifting. 20, 21, 22, 23. A freezing cold, bony hand gently reached out and caressed my cheek. I squeezed my eyes even tighter, terrified to move. 30, 31, 32, 33. A raspy, scratchy voice, sounding like it was coming from long-dead vocal cords, whispered right to me, "Just open your eyes." My throat went completely dry as I forced myself to keep counting numbers in my mind. 45, 46, 47, 48. A damp, rough tongue suddenly licked the side of my face. 67, 68, 69, 70. Exactly at the moment I reached the number 100 in my head, the lights in the room suddenly flickered back on. Even though my eyes were closed, the sudden bright light was very jarring. I slowly opened my eyes to find the room completely empty, exactly the same as I had left it, even though my cheeks still felt slightly wet and damp. For the next 2 whole hours, I hid myself away in the bathroom. I figured that since the only rule about the bathroom had already happened, it was probably the safest place to be. I just sat there on the closed toilet lid, waiting and hoping that time would speed up. Near 5:15 in the morning, I heard a quiet voice speaking right behind me. "You've been quite silent for a long time." It was my exact own voice, not just a thought in my head, but actually out loud for my ears to hear, sounding exactly like a tape recording of myself. I tried my hardest to just ignore it. "Why did you stop talking to Mom before she died?" I clenched my teeth together tightly. "How did it know about my mom?" It asked me again. "Why did you stop talking to Mom before she died?" It just kept repeating the exact same question over and over again from 5:15 all the way until the sun came up. I was getting very close to my absolute breaking point when the sun finally crested over the horizon. As soon as the sunlight hit, the creepy voice completely stopped. Everything was silent and peaceful once more. Between sunrise at 7:30 and 8:30, absolutely nothing weird happened at all. I braced myself for the worst, expecting something terrifying to jump out of the wardrobe, but nothing did. At exactly 9 a.m., the intercom announced happily, "It is now 9 a.m. The study is complete. Do you have any questions?" I immediately jumped up from my chair, grabbed all my stuff, and walked straight to the door, which was now unlocked. Standing right by the elevator was the exact same balding man from the night before. He smiled at me and said, "Congratulations on remaining silent throughout the night. Your participation has been invaluable to our study." He handed me a physical check for $2,000 and what looked like a professional business card. "Here is your payment, and if you are interested in participating in any of our future studies, Please call this number. I just stared at him in total silence, too shocked to speak. Please follow me, he instructed me, walking with me into the elevator. I have decided to go stay with my dad for a while to get away. I am even thinking about transferring to a different school. I simply cannot bear to be on that campus right now. I am writing this post late at night while lying in my bed. I have not spoken very much at all since all of this crazy stuff happened. I am absolutely terrified that something might hear me talking. My clock just struck 3:07 a.m., and right as it did, a cold, mechanical voice filled my bedroom. It is now 3:07 a.m. All right, everyone. No Cardiologist 1353 is easily in the top 5 scariest stories and no sleep stories we have ever featured on this channel. It is truly remarkable and terrifying. My questions for you all are, first, would you attempt to leave the room? Because at this point in the story, if they tell you, oh, if you try to leave, the test is over, I feel like the study is already over anyway because you are totally doomed. You are going to die if you try to leave the room. My second question is, if you somehow survive this nightmare, would you actually go back for another study? Because I feel like $2,000 for one night, yes, that is a very significant amount of money, but it really needs to be $2,000 plus the extra cost of years of therapy because you will undoubtedly need a therapist after an experience like this. Anyway, a huge shout out to No Cardiologist 1353. Let us move on to the next story. The next story is from our Scary Stories section, submitted by a user named Trash_Tia. The story is about how my sister and her roommates have a remarkably unsettling and weird connection with their houseplants. What on earth? Just a few days ago, my older sister, who is 28 years old, suddenly stopped responding to my text messages and phone calls. As the youngest sibling in the family at 25 years old, I felt a very strange sense of responsibility to check on her and make sure she was okay. Rosie has always been a very headstrong and stubborn person, so ignoring me instead of just explaining her situation was pretty much in character for her. Still, nearly a whole week had passed without a single word from her. She had not even posted a mediocre TikTok video, which was highly unusual for a millennial who loves social media. I had not had the chance to visit her new apartment place yet. Life had just gotten in the way, and I was struggling with some rather intense depressive episodes during the time of her housewarming party. My mother had spent 3 whole hours stressing out and agonizing over what gift to give to Rosie. She had ordered an exotic plant online and was determined to find the absolute perfect present. But it seemed like all the other guests had just showered my sister with boring things like expensive silverware and heavy paperweights. Nevertheless, Rosie is absolutely obsessed with plants and gardening. So the exotic plant was indeed the absolute ideal housewarming gift for her. I did not fully grasp just how extreme my sister's fascination with plants had gotten until I was standing right on her front doorstep, face to face with a massively overgrown lily plant, with its huge leaves actually brushing against my forehead. There was no normal, conventional flower garden outside. The house was too small for a real yard. Instead, someone had literally planted flowers directly between the cracks in the concrete path leading up to the front door. I almost felt guilty stepping on them. When I finally reached the door, I noticed thick vines creeping through the door frame and snaking their way all up the walls of the house. I knocked on the door, trying to suppress my growing unease. Rosie had 3 roommates living with her, all of whom were still college acquaintances that I had never actually met in person. I had, however, heard enough stories about them to feel as though I knew them way better than they even knew themselves. Ever since we were little children, Rosie had developed a strong habit of getting intense fascinations with things, becoming completely engrossed and obsessed with television programs, performers, singers, flora, and now her new companions. Every single time she visited our house for a meal, the conversation never centered on her own well-being or what was happening in her life. Rosie would only speak of her friends with a distinct, bright radiance in her eyes, and her smile would widen considerably whenever she mentioned their names, prompting me to question if the 4 of them shared a bond that went way beyond just normal friendship. The exact moment the front door creaked open, an overwhelming, heavy aroma immediately assaulted my senses. It was excessively potent and strong. It permeated my nostrils and lingered at the very back of my throat, nearly suffocating me with its thickness. Curiously, however, the smell also drew me in, almost beckoning me to take a deep breath. allowing each heavy fragrance to saturate my lungs and intensifying the sensation of being completely overwhelmed. The individual who peered through the narrow opening of the door appeared to be closer to my age, in his mid-20s. His sun-kissed hair was in total disarray, looking as though he had run his dirty fingers through it way too many times, with noticeably messy, sticky strands of hair intertwined with actual daisies. I found myself completely captivated by every single individual bloom of flowers adorning the top of his head. His smile was asymmetrical and looked like he knew a secret, with one eyebrow raised high as if he had completely anticipated my arrival. I had previously dismissed my sister's description of him as having plant boy energy as just a silly exaggeration, but I was now forced to completely agree with her, though not for the reasons you might initially assume. Yes, he was wearing a literal garland of flowers around his neck, and I was beginning to suspect this was the root cause of my sister's deep infatuation with him. But this fellow was utterly unkempt and filthy. His short-sleeved t-shirt was no longer white at all. In fact, it retained no discernible color whatsoever, just a thick smear of dark grime ingrained deeply into the fabric, clinging to his visibly perspiring, sweaty skin. I highly doubted he had taken a bath in weeks, or perhaps even months. As he casually swatted away a fly buzzing near his head, my gaze drifted down to his feet. He was completely barefoot, with thick dirt caked heavily between his toes. He seemed almost completely inebriated or drunk, his pupils visibly dilated and huge as he swayed back and forth on his feet, as if he was totally intoxicated by the very air around him. He was high on that heavy scent, perhaps high enough to completely disregard basic personal cleanliness and hygiene. I managed to finally find my voice, even though my own palms were growing very clammy and sweaty. "Hi," I said, attempting to avert my eyes away from his dirty feet. "I'm Posey." The individual's smile just widened even more, and his voice was smooth, almost musical, which only solidified my strong suspicion that my sister and her weird housemates were unknowingly getting high and intoxicated by that overwhelming aroma. I had not expected him to actually recognize my childhood nickname, yet he tilted his head slowly to the side, as if I were some kind of strange enigma he was struggling to decipher. I cannot fully articulate it in words, but this man seemed to deeply dislike me right from the start. His smile was sufficiently amiable and polite, yet it felt very condescending, as though he was only obligated to converse with me because he had to. He exuded a strong aura of high school meanness, his lips curving into a fake semblance of a smile, his eyes scrutinizing me from my head down to my toes as if he himself was not covered in layers of dirt. He was openly mocking me, compressing his lips together in an unsuccessful attempt to conceal his amusement at my expense. "You're Rosie's older sister," he stated. "Poppy," I corrected him firmly. His smile did not falter at all. "An interesting choice of name," he remarked. "I didn't choose it," I retorted back. "May I speak with my sister?" He just shrugged his shoulders casually. "She's unavailable at the moment." I nodded my head patiently, though this individual was progressively irritating me more and more. His gaze remained completely unwavering, as if he were absorbing my entire physical being with just one single glance. "May I come in? It's Cass," I asked. "I didn't ask." His lips curled into a mean smirk. "It's common courtesy. May I simply see my sister?" I stifled a loud groan of frustration. "Please." He rolled his eyes, feigning an exaggerated, dramatic sigh. "Ugh." But then I'd have to navigate the stairs. I could physically feel my smile thinning out. "You're in your mid-20s. He shrugged again. "Exactly halfway to 30. May I see my sister? She's occupied with something right now." "Very well. Then may I come inside and see her for myself?" His smile remained completely unchanged. "We have a substantial number of plants inside. I am aware. You might feel overwhelmed." "I'll be fine," I stated firmly. "I can manage a few flowers." Something in his facial expression flickered momentarily for just a split second. A genuine, real smile played across his lips. The fake facade he presented began to crack and break, revealing the young man beneath, whose demeanor brightened up instantly at the mere mention of flora and flowers. "Do you like flowers?" he asked. When I remained completely silent, he straightened his posture, offered a mock bow, and gestured for me to walk inward. Come in, but don't say I didn't issue a warning. He winked at me, leaving me with that infuriating, annoying smile. When I hesitated for a second, he retreated inside and moved down the dark corridor. I followed right behind him, completely mesmerized and shocked by the sheer, overwhelming abundance of vegetation everywhere. The exact instant the front door swung shut behind me, I flinched in fear, but Cass merely chuckled, attributing the noise to a faulty door hinge. I could sense his heavy gaze upon me, giving off a palpable sense of triumph. He was completely correct. I was instantly overcome by the sheer density of green plant life surrounding me, with leaves brushing against my hair and prickling my exposed arms. When I had to physically push through thick, luxuriant foliage just to follow Cass, stumbling over blooming flower buds that were emerging directly from cracks in the floorboards, I finally understood that my sister and her equally peculiar housemate had crossed a threshold of no return. This dwelling seemed much more suited for botanical plant life than for actual human inhabitants. I proceeded very cautiously, absorbing the sight of every single blossom, every miniature tree, every weird mushroom. Whatever she had managed to cultivate, she had done it. My sister had literally transformed their entire hallway into a miniature, indoor rainforest. I felt a spider scurry quickly across my arm and quickly brushed it off in disgust. The deeper I ventured into the dark house, the more painfully evident it became that my sister's plant obsession had escalated to a highly alarming and dangerous degree. Cass, seemingly completely unperturbed by the thick grime embedded in the carpet and the heavy spiderwebs clinging to every single surface, guided me into what I presumed was supposed to be the kitchen. However, an excessive, crazy amount of greenery completely dominated the space. Tangled vines and huge leaves hung down from the ceiling and sprouted directly out of the walls, making any kind of food preparation seem completely impossible. A refrigerator and an oven were present in the room, but like absolutely everything else in the house, they were heavily coated in thick dirt. I was partially aware that I was standing directly beneath a colossal, massive sunflower that seemed to be growing directly out of the ceiling plaster. What remained of the kitchen floor tiles had been completely ripped out and removed to accommodate fresh, dark soil beneath my feet. Cass provided a brief tour of the house, and the situation only got worse and worse. The upstairs area was ostensibly off-limits to guests, but I glimpsed the staircase, and that was more than sufficient to see the horror. Whatever was growing on the floor up there was spreading wildly, entwined with every single piece of furniture, every touch of paintwork, and had eventually reached the ceiling, creeping into the kitchen and beyond like a thick, green web. Cass was a reasonably competent tour guide, though he paused at each individual plant to meticulously identify it by its Latin name and recount its detailed origins. He led me into a lounge area that was, once again, completely inundated with plants. I was fairly certain these individuals had literally planted real grass inside their living room just to accommodate a wide variety of unusually colored flowers blooming from every single corner. A semblance of a normal living space remained, with a faded, old couch positioned directly before a dust-gathering television screen. I observed a girl wearing yellow kneeling before the large window, basking in the warm afternoon sunlight. Her head tilted all the way back, her eyes closed tight, with dark brown curls intertwined with real roses cascading all the way down the curve of her spine. The vibrant yellow color was her dress, which was faded and sculpted to an almost skeletal, thin form on her body. She possessed a striking, unusual beauty, yet her allure did not conform to any conventional standards of attractiveness. As she slightly turned her head, presumably to absorb more of the sunlight, allowing it to caress every inch of her face, I noticed her sharp, angular nose and uneven teeth. Strangely, however, she seemed to fit perfectly within the overgrown room, just like another one of the exotic flowers. Upon closer inspection, a very disquieting, unsettling sensation stirred deep within me. She was in a very similar physical state to Cass. Her hair was a matted, tangled, dirty mess. It was very evident that she had not taken a bath in some time, and she was wearing the exact same dirty dress, which almost framed her body, blending into her skin and adhering tightly to her. Cass. Her voice came out as a soft, breathy sigh, and I detected a soft, British cadence in her accent. The girl's eyes flickered open slightly, her lips twitching into a small smile. She shook her head slowly, relishing the bright streaks of sunlight that kissed her cheeks. This girl was absorbing the light greedily, chuckling softly to herself in a weird way. "Darling, didn't I tell you to stop picking up strays?" she said. I noticed several gross flies buzzing around her head, crawling across her face and even slipping between her lips, but she remained completely unfazed by them, her smile just widening more. Cass, leaning casually against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest, rolled his eyes at her comment. "That's Violet. She's here for her daily dose of sunlight." He offered me a smile. This smile seemed completely genuine and real. I truly believed that being surrounded by all these plants brought this young man immense joy. He appeared to be absolutely radiant, bathed in the late afternoon golden rays, casting a long shadow across his face. "It's a house tradition. We gather here every single morning and soak up the early sunrise together," he explained. I was completely at a loss for words, simply murmuring, "Cool." I suspected the two of them expected me to join in their weird ritual, particularly when Cass moved much closer to the window, stepping directly into the bright sunlight. I watched as he slowly tilted his head all the way back, his eyes closing as if he was reveling in the feeling, letting the light seep into him and permeate his very bones. I could clearly observe each deep breath he took, and each one appeared and sounded incredibly peaceful, as if each inhalation were gently and slowly drawn from deep within his lungs. For some strange reason, a part of me actually longed to participate in whatever this weird thing was. Clearly brought them happiness. It calmed them down, drawing them away from the sheer tedium of their normal lives and into the warm light. I found myself smiling, my gaze fixed on the two weird housemates, simply existing in their own world, before I suddenly caught myself and snapped out of it. These two were incredibly unsanitary and dirty. Their home was a massive health hazard, and I was quite certain they were completely high on a toxic combination of intense sunlight and a constant, heavy influx of scents, which was clouding their logical thought processes and depleting enough brain cells to prevent them from behaving like actual normal human beings. I suspect I was also slowly succumbing to the effects of the smell. I was already heavily intoxicated by the pervasive, thick odor in the air. However, my physical body sensed that something was very wrong. A tiny sliver of pure panic began to weave its way through my mind, igniting every single nerve ending in my body. "Cass?" I finally found my voice as he led me outside to the backyard. "Huh," he responded. He proudly presented his absolute favorite plant, a purplish rose that he held very delicately in his dirty hands. I could not bring myself to say out loud, "This is incredibly bizarre and wrong." Rosie's housemates possessed a small greenhouse in their tiny, cramped backyard. It was not entirely surprising, but their entire house was essentially just one giant greenhouse. Suddenly, my sister became secondary in my mind as Cass guided me through a massive profusion of the exact same type of plant. He moved with total ease among the thick soil, his bare feet squishing through the wet earth as he ambled from one plant to another, watering each one with perfect, careful precision as if they were his own biological offspring. When Cass finally finished tending to each individual stem, he picked up the garden hose and literally sprayed himself with water, gulping the water directly from the nozzle like an animal. Cass tossed the heavy hose over to me, still sputtering water everywhere. "Want some?" he asked. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "It's fresh." This young man was deeply, completely enamored with flowers and his weird way of life. In doing so, he had somehow completely forgotten his own basic humanity. Rosie was being utterly reckless living in these disgusting, unsanitary conditions, and I was absolutely determined to extract her and get her out of there. "Where is your bathroom?" I inquired, forcing a fake smile onto my face. I was already physically backing away from him. Cass seemed completely oblivious to my fear, kneeling down before a patch of dark earth. He used his bare hands to dig a fresh hole for what I presumed was a brand new plant. I watched his dirty fingers sift through the dirt, Something very slimy and gross began to rise up in my throat. "The bathroom is upstairs on your left," he responded with a low, humming sound. I did not wait for him to confirm the specific door or room number. I was already stumbling and rushing back into the dark house. Violet was still sunbathing in the lounge when I peeked my head in, but this time she had removed her shirt, and I swear to God I saw something green actually sprouting directly from her left breast. I could clearly see it entwined around her skin, creeping slowly down towards her abdomen. I was already racing up the stairs as fast as I could. My sister's name caught tightly in my dry throat. "Rosie." I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, and it slipped from my trembling, sweaty hands and fell. "Rosie." Taking slow, careful steps down the dark hallway, I found myself physically pushing through thick, tangled vines and heavy flowers that were physically obstructing the bathroom door. There were 6 rooms on the second floor, 2 of which were completely blocked off, totally engulfed by thick greenery. When I finally managed to force the heavy bathroom door open, I stepped directly into thick branches that whipped across my face and tore at my hair. The bathroom, surprisingly enough, was the most conventional, normal-looking room in the entire house. Apart from the large, pulsing flowering buds that were almost as tall as I was, climbing all up and down the tiles, I could still clearly discern a bathtub and a toilet, both of which were completely filled with thick dirt. I had absolutely no doubt that they were being used as makeshift planters. Something moved on the tiled wall. One of the pink flower buds twitched violently. I took a step forward, tripping over tangled, thick vines protruding directly from the bathroom floor. No, they were not just vines. Something deep inside my mind snapped, came completely undone, and I felt myself straighten up in shock, my hands slowly creeping up towards my mouth in horror. I knew exactly what it was before it even fully registered in my brain. My physical body was far ahead of my logical brain. I was partially aware of a loud scream clawing its way up my throat, but my palm was tightly muffling my mouth. The body at my feet was completely encased in a thick, silken lining, very much akin to a giant cocoon, but I could clearly discern thick, sandy hair sprouting from a decaying, rotting skull. His legs were curled tightly inward, resembling the posture of a fetus. I dropped heavily to my knees right beside him, his name muffled against my shaking palm. "Cass." I desperately wanted to believe he was still alive. I wanted to believe he was just sleeping and well, but when I made the terrible mistake of rolling his body onto its back, I immediately vomited, choking heavily on the bitter bile, struggling to force it back down my throat. Cass was a macabre, twisted artist's rendition of twisted beauty. His eyes had been completely removed from his skull, replaced by twin, bright dandelions, and his skeletal teeth were heavily entangled with thick vines, as if someone had painstakingly spent hours, or even days, meticulously transforming his dead corpse into their dark masterpiece. His internal organs had been carefully and meticulously excised, as if by a highly skilled surgeon's hand, and every single one was replaced by blooming, colorful flowers. Cass's heart, or what physically remained of it, was a beautiful, blossoming red rose. While its long stem was heavily entwined through his cracked rib cage, flowering all the way down to the massive gouge where his intestines should have been. The most deeply disturbing aspect of it all was, even without eyes or a soul, somehow this dead young man was still smiling a wide, creepy smile. When I attempted to roll his body onto its front as a simple gesture of respect, I quickly realized his body, his entire physical being, was irrevocably fused and glued to the bathroom tiles. My only thought then was to escape the room immediately, because if my sister's housemate was already dead before my very eyes, who on earth had actually allowed me into their terrifying home? I was pulling the heavy door open, my body fueled by pure, raw adrenaline, when the twitching and expanding bud on the wall suddenly moved again. This time, I stumbled forward, catching a brief, horrifying glimpse of a human face emerging from the writhing, fleshy petals. 2 human faces. The first face was a young man whom I presumed was the third unnamed housemate. The giant flowering bud was attempting to expel him, but he was undigested, raw flesh, cocooned in a thick, sticky white substance. This young man was exactly my age. He had dark brown hair and traces of laughter lines etched around his eyes, marking him clearly as the group's resident joker. I initially thought he was largely intact and merely unconscious, until my gaze traveled downwards, discovering his completely hollowed-out stomach, which, much like Cass's body, was heavily filled with blooming, colorful flowers. The second human face emerged rapidly from the plant, slick with the exact same sticky white substance. The massive entity that held her, that held the unnamed dead boy, was completely alive, twitching and swaying from side to side, as if it were openly taunting me, challenging me to try and liberate my sister's mangled, dead corpse. I already instantly recognized her dark blonde curls tied into that ridiculous, messy ponytail, and the small butterfly tattoo on her cheek that she got only last year. It was Rosie. My sister's eyes were closed tight. Tiny pink flowers had wound themselves deeply around her pupils. I really did not want to look at the horrific sight, but I could not tear my gaze away from it. I already knew deep down that she was completely deceased. Her cheeks were gray and totally devoid of any human color. A vicious, merciless green tinge was creeping slowly across her face and deeply entwined in her dried blood. I could clearly see where the infection had spread, looking like a dark contagion stretching up her neck and erupting all across her face. Yet my eyes defied my brain, dropping down to her swollen, heavily pregnant abdomen, which, unlike the rest of her dead body, was still very much alive and moving. Something invisible propelled me forward, and as the plant sensed my movement, thick, entwined green vines wrapped tightly around my sister's stomach, as if they were fiercely protective of whatever horrible thing lay within her. But my sister could not possibly be pregnant. When she was much younger, Rosie suffered from extremely severe, agonizing menstrual cramps to the point of requiring emergency room treatment at the hospital. She had undergone a major surgical hysterectomy so that she would never, ever be able to conceive children in her lifetime. I found myself completely transfixed by the writhing, moving entity that was stretching out my sister's dead abdomen. So, how on earth was Rosie pregnant? My gaze flickered quickly to the unnamed dead housemate and then over to Cass's body. Both of them had been completely hollowed out and filled with blooming flowers, which clearly meant my sister was not its only victim. This parasitic entity simply required a living host, and Rosie's body had been a success. In a single, swift, panicked motion, I was at the door, my hands clamped tightly around the metal handle. "Posey," Cass's voice suddenly spoke, making me whip around so fast my heart leaped right into my throat. Whatever this monstrous entity was, it was perfectly mimicking the voice of the deceased boy, a dead boy I had never truly known in life. As the thing tilted its head, a single bright pink flower suddenly bloomed directly from his right eye socket, completely taking it over. His dead skin moved and writhed, looking as if something was alive beneath it, entangled within every single mimicked bone. I could clearly see this entity coming to full life, not just within Cass's corpse, but all around us in the rustling leaves, in the giant buds holding my sister and the unnamed housemate. It sounded exactly as if they were all laughing together. When Cass opened his dead mouth, blood-stained, slimy petals slipped through his lips, and I completely broke, both physically and mentally. I threw myself past his body, and as he reached for me, his slimy, inhuman fingers wrapping tightly around my arm, I slammed his heavy head into the hard floor once. He shrieked loudly like a wounded animal. I slammed it twice. Blood-stained, thick slime erupted from his mouth and nose. An inhuman, terrifying wail rattled not just from his mouth, but from all around us in the walls. Violet's loud scream echoed up from downstairs. The massive entity holding my sister echoed its terrible cry, and Rosie's body dropped heavily to the floor. A sudden, harmonious, invisible wave of energy slammed into me, so incredibly powerful that I had to bury my head deep in my knees to block it out. Cass fell heavily to his knees, conscious but writhing in invisible, agonizing pain. There was a brief moment when his dirty hands came up, clawing desperately at the greenery sprouting directly from his skull before they finally fell completely limp. I absolutely loathed myself for not dragging Rosie's body out with me, but she was already dead, and I could not inflict that horrible sight upon myself again. I did not stop running, did not falter for a second, forcing myself to keep running until I was halfway down the street, screaming loudly into my hands. I returned back to my own home, and for the subsequent few days, I remained completely silent and in shock. I showered repeatedly, scrubbing my skin until it was raw and red, until my thoughts became completely hazy and numb. 2 days ago, I stood before my bedroom mirror, physically pulling half of a tangled, thorny rose out from my own spine, where the sharp thorns had pricked right through my skin. I went to the restroom at my work and found myself staring in horror at tiny green buds actually growing directly on my chest. I completely broke down and confessed everything to my mom. I told her absolutely everything, showing her exactly what was growing out of my skin. I plucked each tangled, dirty root from beneath my fingernails, dropping them in a pile in front of her on the table. "Rosie is dead," I shrieked loudly, my voice trembling with pure terror. Mom remained completely silent for a long moment, her fingers gently caressing her warm coffee cup. Then she slowly reached across the table and gently removed a stray petal clinging to my hair. "That young man was a very bad influence on her," she finally stated calmly. "When I first visited them, these children were supposed to be adults, and yet they made very foolish, reckless decisions." Mom sighed heavily, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Cass and your sister argued very frequently, while the other two," she scoffed dismissively. "Violet, a former pregnant teenager, and Nate, who ended up in juvenile detention." Mom's smile grew very wistful and strange as she played with my hair. "There are good things growing in that house, Posey," Mom said softly. "Good people." I left the house before she could even finish her sentence, grabbing my bag and making a fast escape out the door. I can still hear her weird words echoing in my mind, and even here, in this new place where I know she won't find me, I can physically feel her gaze boring into my back. I am so incredibly terrified that she is coming for me. I can still see her staring, almost longingly, at the flowers growing from my skin, just waiting. Besides, Mom's voice was punctuated by a low chuckle, and I swear to God I could see tiny specks of green dirt entwined deeply beneath her fingernails. She whispered, "I'm going to be a grandmother. All right, has anyone here ever encountered or played the video game The Last of Us? Because that is exactly the kind of creepy, post-apocalyptic atmosphere I'm getting right now from this story. Except it's not the infectious spores of some creepy mushroom. It's, that nice, harmless succulent plant sitting in your living room. And, the fake Cass who answered the door really didn't want to let her into the house at all. So maybe the original poster should have just listened to his vibe and said, 'All right, yeah, she's busy. I'll come back another time when she's not being transformed into a giant plant.' Anyways, a huge shout out to Trash Tia for delivering another absolute banger of a story. As always, once again, reading another Trash Tia story, and I've never read a single one that is subpar. They're all so excellent and terrifying. That concludes our collection of chilling Reddit tales from the world of Minecraft for this installment. We encountered some truly captivating and scary narratives today. A special commendation goes out to all my esteemed channel members. Your unwavering backing of this channel is immensely valued and deeply appreciated. Should you feel inclined to offer further assistance to the channel, you'll find the relevant link conveniently placed within the description below. However, please understand that this is entirely voluntary and by no means obligatory. If this video resonated with you, kindly consider bestowing a like upon it and subscribing, as these actions significantly contribute to my efforts. With all that having been expressed, I shall look forward to encountering you all again come tomorrow. Thank you for your viewership. Farewell.